We also have a new consumer base. Those same demographic shifts are moving through the consumer population, and not only are the numbers changing, but buying power is changing. And if you're interested in new business, it is increasingly to be found with racial and ethnic minority populations. Those are where the most rapid increases in buying power are happening. And even if you sell to businesses, if you take a look at who's starting new businesses, the people that are most rapidly starting new businesses are women, racial and ethnic minority populations, veterans, people that are living with disabilities, people that identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. So regardless of whether you sell to consumers or businesses, diversity and inclusion needs to be part of what you are thinking about as you reach out to maintain your relationship with consumers and grow your consumer base. Allstate is a wonderful example of this. Allstate is an example of a company that did it right. In the 1990s, they made a strategic decision to reach out and engage the Hispanic and Latino population with their insurance products and services. And they were serious about it. They invested about $50 million in the 1990s. They didn't just change some words and change some logos. They moved physical locations into predominantly Hispanic and Latino populations. They changed the demographics of their workforce, and today they own that consumer base to the point of $1.6 billion. They own that consumer population. For every Allstate story, there's 10 or 100 or maybe 1,000 stories of companies that have done it horribly wrong. They thought they could get by changing some language or changing some images, and they didn't develop a relationship with that population. So if you're going to do this, which I think that you should do it, probably regardless of what kind of business you're in, it needs to be very intentional, and it needs to be a partnership. There's also a new contract in place, and this maybe isn't real significant right now because the economy's crazy and there's not a lot of jobs out there, but that's going to change. Sooner or later, the economy's going to go back, and this is going to be a bigger part of the equation. We all know that the contract has changed. The unspoken, unwritten contract between employee and employer has changed because 15 or 20 years ago, the companies started firing people. They broke that contract. They ripped it up. There was a time in the not too distant past where you could go to work for a company and you both understood that if you kind of stayed out of trouble and pulled your weight, that was going to be a long-term relationship, right? 20 years in a gold watch, that doesn't exist anymore, and we know that it doesn't exist. And none of us are really looking for that anymore. The balance of power has shifted. It's more of an adult relationship now, and loyalty is not a given. Loyalty is not a given, and so if you want to have loyalty in your workforce, you have to understand what their unique needs are. The workforce is becoming more complex. Their lives are becoming more complex. Not only is it becoming more diverse by gender, race, and ethnicity, we also have more employees. We have more two-earner families in the workforce than ever before. We have more people in the workforce today that have dependent children and or dependent adults at home. The needs of the workforce are becoming more complex. And if you want to have their loyalty, which is not a given when they come to work for you, you've got to do a good job at meeting their unique needs. Diversity and inclusion also drive better problem solving. Going back to Scott Page's research in his book, The Difference. If you want to have better problem solving, if you want to have better solutions, cognitive diversity is going to drive that. And I think if you look at the world of business today, if you look at education, if you look at healthcare, if you look at government, I think we could use some better solutions. Part of that is cognitive diversity. But go back to that study and think about those two groups at Harvard. A lot of you said right away that the random 10 wins. But are we really thinking that way with our hiring and promotion practices? Or are we all still trying to hire the top 10? If we understand and believe in the value of cognitive diversity, we've got to find ways to bring that together. We've got to find ways intentionally to bring different thinking styles together and deal with the friction that may accompany that. We are also increasingly aware of the importance of organizational culture. Not all organizations are, but organizations and people that think about it and study it and write it are more and more aware of the impact of organizational culture. And you can just look at two things. You can look at employee retention and you can look at employee engagement, which are both attached to really big dollar numbers. They are both strongly dependent on organizational culture. So if you want to change your retention numbers, if you want to change your employee engagement numbers, organizational culture is one of the things that you've got to understand. You've got to understand what your culture is and what influences it, and is it a culture that works for a lot of people in your organization, different kinds of people. So you've got to understand, if you want to have a good culture that is engaging and you have parity of retention, you've got to understand the diversity and the diversity of interests and needs in your workforce. We're also increasingly aware of the fact that conformity is a bad thing. And organizations and managers kind of by nature are conformists because conformity makes things simpler. But we can take a look at Enron, we can take a look at some of the recent financial stuff that's happened, and we can take a look at the space shuttle disaster. And we can see conformity playing a role in all of those things. People wanting to get along and play along rather than make their unique contribution and speak the truth. And sometimes, this is another one of those things, I think, that when we're grown and we have business suits and business cards, we think we're not influenced by social pressure. That's a junior high thing. Not true. Social pressure is a beast. Conformity is a beast, especially in the workplace. And it takes intentionality, and it takes support, and I think it takes a fair amount of courage to push back on that. Every organization has a different amount of conformity, but conformity is a bad thing. And for organizations to push back on that conformity, they've got to understand and appreciate the value of difference and seek it out. And last but not least, if all of the other stuff didn't exist, this alone is a good business case for paying attention to diversity and inclusion. Because human nature, even though we've convinced ourselves otherwise, human nature pushes us away from it. Human nature pushes us away from it, regardless of our intentions. Regardless of our intentions. Human nature pushes us away from diversity. We spend time, seek out people that we think are like us. We still, to this day, despite all of our technology, despite all of the research, despite all of the tools, the research shows that today we are still not good at hiring the best person for the job. What we are still good at is hiring people that we think are like us. We are very good at that. We convince ourselves we're doing something different, but that's one of those quirks of human nature.